Chapter 2, Part 2 video. Today we're going to talk about types of anticoagulants. We have different anticoagulants that are in the tube. These anticoagulants, we have the calcium binding anticoagulants. That is your ethylene diametric acid, the EDTA. We have the powdered dipotassium and the liquid tripotassium. That is the forms of the calcium binding anticoagulants. And then we have the thrombin inhibition, which is your heparin, sodium, lithium, and ammonium. The main anticoagulant for the coagulation studies is sodium citrate. So that's one of the main ones. So just remember, the main anticoagulant used for coagulation studies is the sodium citrate. The EDTA, the powdered dipotassium, and the liquid tripotassium, these bind calcium that is required by the coagulation cascade. The most anticoagulants in the blood collection tubes prevent clotting by binding calcium. So the most popular is going to be your calcium binding. When we talk about the thrombin inhibition, like your heparin, sodium, lithium, ammonium, they stop the formation of thrombin that is required to prevent fibrinogen into a fibrin clot. So they stop that formation of thrombin. So when we talk about one key note that I want to point out, the anticoagulant composition must be considered when running tests on plasma. An example of this would be the EDTA. It cannot be used when plasma calcium level is requested because the plasma will be bound to the EDTA. So when we're thinking about that, just remember that we cannot use the EDTA when we're checking plasma contents because it cannot be used when plasma calcium level is requested because plasma will be bound to that EDTA. When we collect blood and the tube has the anticoagulant mixed in there, we need to make sure that we thoroughly mix this. So it will be mixed up well and it will do its job appropriately. The normal plasma and serum, they appear to be yellow. So we need to know how these different samples look. And examples of abnormal appearance, if it's hemolyzed, it will be red. If it's icteric, it will be yellow. And if it's lipemic, it will be cloudy. Variations in the normal appearance can indicate that certain test results may be adversely affected. So that's important to remember as well. So looking over at our icteric samples, remember we said the icteric appeared to be yellow because they have increased bilirubin. So if you're looking at this specimen, you can see here, this is what normal plasma looks like. So that's normal. And then the center one would appear to be icteric. Those bilirubin levels are high. And then the lipemic, this one, the lipemic, the cloudy looking one here is on the right. So that will give you an idea of what you're looking at there. So again, the lipemic specimens appear milky. The icteric specimens appear to be dark yellow because they have increased bilirubin, and the lipemic have increased lipids, and that causes them to appear to be milky looking. And then the hemolyzed specimens, they appear to be pink and red in color. They indicate erythrocyte destruction. Erythrocyte destruction is when the red blood cells erythrocyte destruction equals red blood cell production. So the lab refers to blood as whole blood, plasma, and serum. Equipment organization, we need to make sure that when we go to collect the lab that we select the appropriate equipment. So knowing if you're going to do a capillary stick or a dermal stick, you're going to need the lancet rather than your butterfly set or your needle set. So just knowing what type of lab you're doing is very important. And also we're going to get into the different colors, which color tubes we use when we pull certain blood samples. The primary antiseptic for routine venipuncture that we clean the skin with is isopropyl alcohol. So before we stick a patient's body to go in their vein to get blood, we clean the skin with the isopropyl alcohol. So moving forward, I want to talk about the blood collection trays next. I'm going to go over a couple of different stations with you here, but we're going to first start with this regular blood collection tray. Keeping your equipment organized, that's a must. Having a well-organized tray in the room with you is ideal. It prevents errors. One thing that we must remember, if we're in an isolation room, when we talked about in the previous chapter, if a patient is on airborne precautions or contact isolation, they're in what we call isolation rooms, and we have to wear certain personal protective equipment. So when a patient is in an isolation room, we do not carry these trays into the isolation room. We're going to remember to place the tray on a solid surface when we are taking the tray in patients' rooms. So they don't go in an isolation room. However, if it's not an isolation room, we need to remember that this tray has to be placed on that hard surface. Trays must be emptied and disinfected weekly and frequently if they are visibly soiled. So the trays need to be scrubbed down once a week, or if they are visibly soiled, they need to be emptied and cleaned down and disinfected. We have another form of workstation. These are most popular in the hospitals now. We have the mobile blood collection workstation. These have replaced traditional trays. They can be wheeled to, beside, and about all around the bedside, so you can work off of this tray. Again, these are not carried into isolation rooms because they may act as a reservoir to house that infection. The treatment of the cleaning standards are the same. This is an outpatient drawing station. We see these like in our LabCorp offices, in our doctor's offices. You have the patient sit in this chair, and then you have your stand with all of your equipment beside you. We use the blood drawing chairs with an attach, and they're usually attached or adjacently. There's a workstation attached or adjacent to it to house your supplies. They also have an armrest on them. These armrests tend to fold over and lock into place. That way it would keep you from falling out if a patient were to pass out or become faint. It would kind of support them so they're in a safe position if they do go to faint. If a patient has a history of fainting and they tell you, I can't stand to have my blood collected, if they have that history of fainting, we automatically kind of lay the chair back and secure them in the chair before we actually perform the venipuncture. Venipuncture can be performed as well using the ETS. The ETS is known as the evacuated tube system. It's an evacuated tube system. It's a syringe system or a winged blood collection system. What the ETS does is it eliminates the need for that transfer of blood from that syringe to that needle. So we're able to put the needle in the arm, use the holder, and pop the tube, the evacuated tube, straight up into the holder so the blood goes directly into that tube, rather than pulling it off in a regular syringe and then transferring the blood. This is an infant cradle pad, just to give you guys a visual. So when we're collecting blood off of an infant, this is what they use, and they're able to strap them down to keep them from jumping and running the risk of injuring themselves. There's different venipuncture methods. We talked about the evacuated tube system. That's when we have the wing blood collection set or the needle in the holder, and we pop the tube straight in. The blood travels from the arm directly to the tube. The syringe system is when we attach a syringe to the actual needle that's being used to collect the blood, and then the blood comes back into a syringe, and then we have to use a transfer device to put it over into the correct tube. And the winged blood collection set, I'll show you guys some of these in the next slide. The winged blood collection set, they tend to be smaller. We use these a lot. with people who have fragile veins and they have the little wings that you can hold on to. But when you're looking, this is the evacuated tube system. So this is actually the needle. This is the safety shield that we flipped over when we're done. This is the holder, and then this is the evacuated tube. So this needle goes directly into the arm, and then you pop this up in here on this secondary needle, this needle that's covered with a sheath, and the blood squirts back into that tube. Evacuated tube needles have a rubber sheath to prevent the leakage of blood. So this when we take that tube out, that rubber sheath keeps blood from squirting out everywhere. The advantages of the evacuated tube system over a syringe is because there's no need for transfer of blood, and it's a closed system. The ETS, the evacuated tube system, seems to be the most economical and safest method for preparing a routine venipuncture. The stopper puncture needle should be completely pierced into the evacuated tube after the vein is entered. So we enter the vein first, then we get that flashback, and then we push this tube up on that other syringe and the blood starts coming in. Now we're going to talk about the needles. They're sterile, they're disposable, and they're one-time use. They vary by length and they vary by gauge, and these are color-coded. The standard, make sure I'm not missing anything. The standard needles that are used are 21 to 22 gauge. These are used with the evacuated tube systems. The gauge actually refers to the diameter of the needle. The lower the number, the larger the needle is. We're going to use, with a 25 gauge needle, the needle in the vein is longer, the tubes fill more slowly, and microclots may form because it's so small, and hemolysis can occur because that lumen, that opening in that needle, is so small it could damage those blood cells. We use these 25 gauge needles on children and patients with small veins. Again, the smaller the gauge number, the larger the needle diameter. So in this situation, 16 would be larger than an 18. So 23 gauge needles, we tend to use these with small volumes or partial draws. So again, the greater suction, the greater the suction and the volume increases with this. Collecting a large evacuated tube using a 23 gauge needle may cause a hemolyzed sample. Again, because the smaller that gauge number, the smaller that gauge number, the larger it is. But we're looking at a 23, and a 23 is fairly small. So we run the risk of that hemolyzed sample because that opening is not as large. 23 gauge needles are appropriate for patients with small, fragile veins. However, if we are, if we're looking at different levels in the blood, such as your lipids, your cholesterol, your red blood cells, this maybe would not be appropriate because we run the risk of it damaging that blood as it pulls through to go to the evacuated tube system. That is it for Chapter 2, Part 2 video. There will be more lectures to come.